Here's my overview of a 1/10 scale monster truck, the Arrma Siren. It was an idea originally designed by Tp-Parts Rc-Xtreme. I have a link to his channel below. But this is a 1/10 scale monster truck that uses all 1/8 scale components. Success capable. It's beyond words how well this thing is. As you can see, the chassis is completely filled. I have the V3 Outcast receiver box, the BLX 200, 2050 kV motor, as well as my cheap servo. And receiver box. This is really one of the only ways you can fit all this stuff in such a small chassis. But it does use all the parts from a truckified Typhon design. You can see Rich Duverbatch's channel for details on the truckified Typhon. But I ended up going with the Outcast pulley bar and wing just because it needed it. It destroyed the Talon mount that had the wheelie bar down a little bit further. These shocks, well, it uses the same shocks as the Typhons, but these shocks came on the Typhon roller that I bought off of eBay. They're from a DX8 buggy. They have the same dimensions as the Typhon shocks, but they're a little bit better. And I use 2000 CST shock oil, front and rear. Give it some good dampening. The other thing that I did was modify an X01 chassis brace in order to fit this smaller chassis. The ESC is mounted with dual lock 3M. It's the same stuff that goes on like tollway transponders. If you are familiar with the tollway system, they always include those, and this stuff is awesome. You can literally just snap it down and pick up the entire car. But the hardest part of this mod is the chassis, by far. You literally have to mill down the front end of the chassis exactly 34 millimeters. And all of this has to retain the stock dimensions afterwards. So you take another chassis, put it on this one, clamp them together down 34 millimeters from the front end of the chassis that you're using. And you have to grind away all of that, while keeping the dimensions of the chassis, so everything else will fit once you are done with it. I also have these STRC wheel hex extenders along with the Creighton hubs and axles, because we all love to use giant tires with our small cars. I've pretty much already been through a couple of sets of the Badland 2.8s. This car is just tearing them up. And this is a good tire. The only other thing that I did mod-wise was the side guards. It's pretty much just Lexan and Gorilla Tape. But this thing is really wild. Instead of wheelies, it pretty much does headstands. It can tumble. It does everything that the Truck 5 Typhon can, except that with a smaller wheelbase, it's literally doing double backflips. Especially with the tires that I put on it. These guys right here off, I don't even know what truck these even came off of. It was some sort of HPI, but they're pretty bad. They balloon like crazy, but they look awesome on this thing, so might as well use them while I can. But that pretty much sums it up. Arrma should definitely make this car. It literally has 3 different parts from a regular Typhon. And that's the chassis, the chassis brace on the inside that I had to, oh, that was another thing that I had to modify. The chassis brace on the inside, I literally chopped it in half and screwed the 2 halves together. It's hard to try to see this. But I literally chopped it in half and then screwed the 2 halves together. And it ended up being a perfect fit. And this is also the chassis brace from the Typhon. But other than the milled down chassis, it uses all stock parts from the other 1/8 scale cars. And as you can see, I use the body mounts from the Granite. Mainly to allow the Granite body to fit on it completely. And that was even seamless. As you can see, all I did was screw the mounts to the outsides. The outside over here in the front and the inside of the shock mounts. And it was a perfect fit. Milling the chassis down 33 millimeters is what allows you to use the Typhon's rear drive shaft in the front of the car. It's 82 millimeters. From the stock 116, I think. Yeah, I think the stock is like 116, something like that. But that makes the front drive shaft fit perfectly. You got the right amount of give and everything that it needs to not bind. And like I said before, there's just no describing how this thing drives. I mean, I can say it pretty much drives like an Outcast, but it's a lot more nimble. It turns on a dime. And while it's still heavy, it feels none of that weight because of the 6S motor. I usually run like 15 tooth pins on my cars. I probably want to gear this one up though, because it's a tiny bit lighter than the Typhon because of the milled chassis. But I'll definitely be getting a running video out of this later, because this thing is insane.